Fiscal's 2025 in Review podcast series. Back in January 2025, we'd hosted the World in 2025 Masterclass, which was meant to be a forward-looking conversation on how global power equations, economics, and technology might evolve over the year. One of our key voices then was Professor Yao Yang, today the Dean of the late Di-shui-hu Advanced Finance Institute at the Shanghai University of Finance and Economics, and visiting professor at Peking University. A lot has changed since that discussion, and some of what he foresaw has played out in surprising ways. So in this episode, we're circling back to some of those ideas. How does China see the Trumpian reset of the global order? Has the world's perception of China shifted? What's really happening inside its domestic economy and the new 5-year plan? And are we seeing signs of a thaw with India? A question that a lot of us are keenly watching. To unpack all that, my colleague Dinesh Narayanan, senior journalist and anchor for this series, is in conversation with Professor Yao. Dinesh, over to you.
Thank you, IG. It's a pleasure being here. Thanks for having me here. Last year, so I'll just jump straight into it, Professor Yao. Last when we spoke during the masterclass, you were at that point of time articulating that already the US and China are in a Cold War, and Trump's election and subsequent when we were speaking at the time, the Liberation Day tariffs and all of those things had not been in place yet. How do you look at the year 2025 in that relationship, as well as how has Trump changed the world from your perspective?
Well, 2025 has been a year full of events, right? It's really hard for us to even comprehend all of them, right? The Trump Liberation Day tariffs have changed the world contour of trade and economic relations for many countries. And I can say the same for US-China relations. I mean, as I said, the US-China were already in a sort of a Cold War. Trump kind of escalated that war to a new level. But this time, China has taken a more, I should say, proactive way to deal with the United States, right? I mean, in the past, China played the passive role in this relationship between the two countries, right? United States say, we're going to do this, and then China say, oh, we're going to respond. So this time, China has taken a different approach. This approach looks more assertive, more confident, right? And in the end, it has worked to the surprise of many people, right? For example, when Trump announced the tariffs, China immediately retaliated. Obviously, China had been prepared for this, right? So China had this one-on-one in-kind retaliation. And then Trump was really angry and raised the tariff to 150%. And then China followed until 120%. Okay. So that forced the United States to come back to the negotiating table. So far, there have been 5 rounds of talks, but most of the talks have been based on the first talk, the Geneva talk. The Geneva talk actually gave us a surprise. As I said, China's retaliation has worked. So both countries have agreed to lower the tariff to 34%. I mean, the initial April 2nd tariffs, okay? But even better than that, 24% out of 34% were postponed, right? And postponed. Now, in the last talk, both countries agreed to postpone for 1 year, okay? And then also the so-called fentanyl tariffs were also postponed for 1 year. And the export control imposed by both sides have been postponed for 1 year. Okay. So it seems that the Chinese leaders have learned, Trump is really a tackle. Trump always checking out. So you play tough on Trump, it's going to work. Right.
So, in fact, I remember last when we spoke, you had said that the whatever might be the official response to Trump in general among the common Chinese people, they sort of liked Trump. And they were I mean the conservative policies of Trump sort of hit a chord with them. Does that still remain? Do the ordinary Chinese people still consider Trump the same?
Yeah, because Trump showed the rest of the world that he's a transactional president, right? And in terms of dealing with China, if you can give him something, he's going to play like a tackle. So, in addition to his conservative policies, Chinese people actually like his way to deal with the rest of the world. Because if think about the Biden, right? Biden was not a transactional. Biden held on some ideological stance, right? And Biden worked with America's allies to form a sort of united front against China. And China was kind of cornered. But Trump opened the door, right? Suddenly China found out it's not that difficult to deal with Trump.
Right. So that helped, I guess.
Yeah.
And so now at the almost towards the end of the year, but last month after the meeting in South Korea between President Xi Jinping and President Trump, there is a sense, and many people have voiced it, saying that for the first time, the US treated China as an equal. You think that is correct? That impression?
Well, I'm not that confident. Right? I think in some aspect, yes. For example, on economic issues, United States now I think is treating China as an equal. But I don't think American leaders believe China is an equal in strategic term, in military term. Okay. So only on economic terms.
Okay. So, and also it's probably only a Trumpian view from your perspective, not necessarily leaders.
Well, I think on economic front, most Americans, particularly those elites, right, have realized China now can compete with the United States. In some areas, China is actually ahead of the United States, right? For example, in EVs, in solar panels, in batteries, or battery-related technologies, China is ahead of the United States.
Right. Yesterday, the Chinese ambassador to the US, Mr. Zhifeng, he sort of drew some red lines for China. He said that Taiwan, democracy and human rights, China's political system, and development rights. These are sort of, the red lines for China in future conversations. I mean, I understand the first three of them, but the last one, development rights, what does that mean?
Development rights means can mean in many things, right? For example, when China began to talk with the West on climate change, right? China said you cannot constrain China's development by imposing harsh climate change policy on China or the rest of the developing world. I think India has the same stand, right, together with China. Okay.
This particularly comes up in climate talks. Is that what it's meant? This particular issue really crops up during climate talks.
Oh, well, no, not in the today, right? Because the United States has given up the climate change policy anyway, right? But now I think it's specific to export control. Right.
Okay.
So, United States want to use export control to slow down China's development in AI, right, by controlling the advanced chips. Okay. So I think that's the area. But the thing is that China can do the same, right? China can control the supply of rare earth metals.
Yeah.
That can also slow down or even cut off American high-tech industry development.
But interestingly, China did not impose it only on the United States. It imposed it globally. Now, is that a policy direction which the world should expect from China in the future?
Well, it's because the countries that use rare earth metals the most are Euro-American allies. And they actually work with the United States to impose export control on China. For example, the Netherlands, right? They actually confiscate a Chinese company. I think the Netherlands government was recognized when decided to do that. And China played a really harsh policy back on the Netherlands companies. Okay. So now China, in the past, China tried to negotiate with those countries, okay, but it didn't work. This time, China said, we're going to play tough. If you impose export control on us, or like Netherlands government confiscate Chinese company, we're going to do the same, okay. I don't know how it's going to end up with, right? Netherlands government impose even harsher export control. Okay. So, the whole world is trying to play a kind of game of pain. Okay.
Right.
To the end, who's going to be able to endure the pain most the longer time, then that country is going to win.
Right. That brings me to the question of how is China doing domestically? And, we keep hearing about the debt burden closing in on 300%. And if you include the hidden debt of the local governments, that probably goes above 300%. And now this is a problem which most developed countries are also facing. The United States, Japan, or other countries are also facing. So, I mean, you can already see Japan is trying to print its way out of it, but I don't know how far it will be successful. Clearly, and some of the things which you said in the masterclass, you were expecting a lot of support from the government to the economy, which have all played out during the year. And I think recently, yesterday, I was reading something that it is also offered 50% discounts on electricity charges for data centers if they are domestic data centers. So how do you see the domestic economy and the government's response to it?
Well, the government has done a lot trying to boost the domestic demand, right? For example, the government has rolled out a consumption supporting program for the second year. But the problem is that the size of the program is not that huge. It's only 300 billion RMB. That comes to how much? About 40 billion to 50 billion US dollars, right? So compared to the size of the Chinese economy, uh, which this year I believe is going to be over 140 trillion, so close to 20 trillion US dollars, right? So the support program is small, but it did boost the consumption in the country, right? And the government is also trying to boost the stock market. Okay, the stock prices have been increasing steadily. All right, so that has some effect on domestic consumption. Okay. And the government has lowered the interest rates several rounds. Now, if you save money in a bank, you only get 1%, annual rate, right? So so those are the efforts, right? But they're not enough. I think the government should spend more physically, right? But to me, the Chinese government is really a physically conservative government. Okay. Um, for example, talking about the debts. Okay.
Right.
The central government still wants local governments to repay all the debts, right? I mean, in a sense, that's physical discipline, right? If you forgive the local governments once, then they're going to say, hey, the central government forgive us, right? So next time we are going to borrow again. But in the short run, it's really painful for the local governments, right? Because their tax income is not growing that fast, and their income from land sales has almost cut to zero. Okay, so local governments are having a hard time. Now you ask them to repay all of their debts. That's really a contractionary policy, right? So austerity, is a really good discipline device. But when the economy is not in the best time, austerity is going to at least retard, delay the recovery.
Yeah, the Greece experience.
Yeah, exactly. That was what I want to say. I mean, I don't know why, most governments, particularly, governments in Europe, particularly the German government, right? Germans and the Chinese, a lot of sense look at the same, right? They believe in hard work, right? They don't believe in consumption, right? So when Greece had a problem, then the Germans said, no way, you have to repay the debts, right? We're not going to forgive you. Now, the Chinese central government plays exactly like the German government told the Chinese local government and say, you have to repay the debts.
Right. So, do you think this fiscal conservatism will continue, or do you think the government will see that it is not going anywhere and maybe relax it, especially because there are a lot of structural issues which are coming up, especially aging, right? And I was reading about it. For example, there were a lot of issues within. I mean, it's creating a lot of issues within families because the older generation seems to be richer and had the benefit of the economic boom earlier, but the younger generation doesn't have jobs or not the kind of income which their previous generation had. And so there is a sort of a rift between the two generations, and even families are being torn apart that who's going to get what from their inheritance and all of those kind of things. Is that a correct, sort of picturization?
Yes. When the economy grew really fast, right, young people didn't complain, right, because their income grew much faster than the pensioners. But now it has a lot to do with China's pension system. The pension system was designed in the 1990s, right? Before that, pension relied completely on your work unit and most of the SOEs, all right? But in the 1990s, China redesigned its pension system. Okay, so at that time we established a social pension system. So each person contributed to the social program, and also his or her employee contribute to the system. Okay, but because in the 1990s the inflation rate was high, and not the super high, all right, but that's high. So the pension was the index, inflation index. Okay, so for a long time, pension was increasing by annual rate of 7%. That's really crazy. Usually automatically 7% growth. Then lowered down to 5%, but still very high, right? Only in the last 2 years, it was lowered to 3%, 2 to 3%. But in real term, it's still very high, right? Because we have deflation, right? So it's still quite high. But for young people, their salaries probably don't increase. Okay. So now in some families, you can see the parents, the pensioners, have higher salaries and pensions than their children, the salaries. And the pension is increasing, salaries staggering. Right? So that caused a lot of discussions over the social media. Right? Young people, I'm not worried that much about youth unemployment. So you look at young people between say 16 to 20, the unemployment rate is quite high, 18% or even higher. But if you look at young people between 20 and 24, the unemployment rate is lowered to single digit or even lower, right? So which means it takes time for young people to find their job, right? After graduating from university, they think, oh, they should find a good job, but the reality is not like that. So it takes time for them to find a job.
Yeah, so which means that what you were talking about, the consumption story and the jobs story, the dual circulation strategy has not really worked out very well so far.
Not really. Consumption is endogenous, right? It pretty much depends on people's confidence. Okay, but the domestic economy is growing by a slow pace, right? So people don't feel that the Chinese economy has fully recovered from COVID. I mean, that's why many people have doubts on China's statistics growth numbers. My interpretation is like this. For example, this year, China is going to reach, I think, 5 to 5.2%. I think that's the growth rate. But you have to remember that's a real growth, right? But China's deflation, the GDP deflator is minus 1.2 or even minus 1.4. Okay, so that's the deflation part. Okay, and also China's export growth this year was beyond our expectation. I think this year we are going to have a growth by 6 to 7% again, on top of last year's growth. Export growth probably is going to contribute 1.5 or 1.7 percentage points, right? So those two adding together contributes to 3% of China's growth.
Okay.
So which means that China's domestic growth is only about 2.2% in current term, not in real term, right?
Right.
So if you tell people, that China's domestic economy is growing by 2.2%, then people will say, yeah, that's about right.
Okay.
Right? So that's the problem. I mean, the current problem in China is always a lack of domestic demand. That's how to boost the domestic demand is still going to be a problem for next year.
Right. I think we got about 2 more minutes left, so I'll jump to the next question. When we started the year, relations with India were not so great, and that has changed over the course of the year. What do you think? I was reading today that India is easing more import restrictions from, on China. So what do you think? How is this going to play out? Is it playing out the way you imagined it would, or?
Well, yeah, China's relationship with other countries is always a triangle, right? United States is always behind, right? So I think China and India have come back to a more normal relation because both countries are facing U.S. or a challenge from U.S., right? But I think this should be the normal relationship between our two great countries.
Do you expect it to continue this time around? I know things sometimes come together and then again fall apart, but do you expect it to continue the same way? Or let me ask you, what are the conditions for it to continue the same way?
Well, I think we have to stabilize our borders, right? That's the first thing. And second, we need to improve the economic relations. It's good to see India has relaxed the import control. I think it's more important for Chinese companies to move to India, right? To set up a factory over there, to produce over there, and also to transfer some of the technology over there. Xiaomi is a really good example. Many people say, "Oh, Xiaomi has been trapped in India." I don't think so. Right? Every country has its own industrial policy. We have to respect that. Xiaomi has been flourishing in India. That's a perfect example that Chinese company can take roots in the Indian market.
Right. Well, I'll hand it over to IG for the conclusion, but it has been a pleasure. It's quite a great perspective you gave us about the Chinese economy as well.
My great pleasure to talk with you.
IG.
Thanks, Dinesh, and thank you, Professor Yao Yang, for those very sharp insights. I was listening carefully. It's always valuable to revisit the forecast that we made earlier in the year and see how the world has actually moved. And 2025 certainly has kept us on our toes. I don't think anyone's going to disagree with that. Word for our community, if you'd like to go back to the World in 2025 masterclass that was held on the 30th of January, you'll find the video and the key takeaways on foundingfuel.com. This has been 2025 in Review, our ongoing series of conversations with global thinkers on how the world is being reshaped. I'm Indrajit Gupta. Thank you for tuning in and see you next time.